Hi, I'm Cheryl Birch, and this is part 2 of my two-part video on the Federal Acquisitions Regulations, or the FAR. As you know, the FAR governs the acquisitions of goods and services for the federal government. And there's a lot to consider when you're receiving a contract that includes FAR clauses. First, if you were to print out the FAR, it would run 2,200 pages. So I encourage you to use the FAR site website when you need to look up a clause. Second, note that the FAR clause that was in effect on the date you received your federal contract is the clause to which you are bound. Your contract should include the version date of the clause in parentheses after the clause is listed in your contract. FAR clauses change over time, so it's important to know the version of the clause that was in effect when your contract was issued. Third, within the FAR, government agencies are granted the authority to determine how each agency will implement and supplement the regulations. Many, but not all, government agencies follow the FAR structure and use a numeric prefix to designate its own implementation of the clause. For example, Health and Human Services uses a prefix 3 to designate its implementation of the FAR. So where FAR Part 5 covers publicizing contract actions, the Health and Human Services Acquisition Regulations, or HHSAR, uses Part 305 to govern its implementation of the regulation covering publicizing contract actions. In detail, HHSAR uses Part 305.502 authority to state, written approval at least one level above the contracting officer shall be obtained prior to placing advertisements or notices in newspapers. Note that most agencies that follow the FAR structure in their implementation of the regulations use Parts 70 and above to cover supplemental requirements and issues that aren't covered in the FAR. For example, the Department of Energy's Acquisition Regulations, or DEAR, uses a prefix of 9, so Part 970 involves DOE management and operating contracts, which is a topic not covered in the FAR. Last, make sure you know the context of a clause being included in your contract, as it could be cited inappropriately. Each clause has a prescription for when that clause should be used. When you look up a clause on the FAR site, it will usually start with a comment, as prescribed in 3.202, insert the following clause, with 3.202 being a link to the prescription or instructions on when to use that clause. An example of why this is important is if somebody tells you that the government can't have a contract term of more than 5 years because it would violate FAR Part 37-202, you need to know that 37-202 governs advisory and assistance services. So while those contracts can't be more than 5 years in duration, it does not mean that all government contracts can't have a term that exceeds 5 years. As you can see, there's a lot to consider when dealing with the FAR. I applaud you on educating yourself in this topic and wish you only the best in your career as a research administrator. Thanks for listening.